Captain Zoe Mitchell had developed F-16 combat tactics so aggressive that military high command declared them recklessly dangerous and officially banned their use. For 2 years, she had been grounded from active combat operations, while Air Force brass insisted her methods violated every principle of safe fighter pilot doctrine. But when enemy aircraft overwhelmed 3 Allied squadrons in a single engagement, Zoe's banned tactics were about to prove that sometimes the most dangerous approach is the only one that works. The emergency klaxons screamed across Ramstein Air Base at 06:27 hours, jolting Captain Zoe Mitchell from her morning coffee in the pilot's lounge. For 2 years, she had listened to that sound, knowing it meant other pilots would deploy while she remained grounded, punishment for developing combat tactics that military high command considered too dangerous for operational use. All available pilots to immediate briefing. The announcement crackled over the base communication system. Code red engagement protocols in effect. This is not a drill. Zoe ran toward the briefing room, her flight suit bearing no squadron patches, a constant reminder that she was technically qualified to fly F-16s but prohibited from combat operations. Her tactical innovations had been deemed incompatible with established doctrine after a series of training incidents that nearly resulted in mid-air collisions. The briefing room erupted with controlled chaos as pilots received mission parameters that defied every assumption about modern air warfare. Colonel Morrison stood before tactical displays showing a catastrophic situation developing over Eastern European airspace. Gentlemen, we have confirmation that enemy forces have achieved air superiority over Allied positions using tactics and aircraft that exceed our current defensive capabilities, Morrison announced grimly. 3 Allied squadrons have been eliminated in the past 4 hours. Enemy aircraft are operating with coordination and effectiveness that suggests either significant technological advancement or tactical innovations we haven't encountered. Major Harrison, the squadron leader, studied the displays showing radar tracks of enemy movements. Sir, what aircraft are we facing? Unknown configuration. Radar signatures suggest advanced fighters, possibly Su-57s, with enhanced stealth capabilities and weapon systems that outrange our current air-to-air missiles. Zoe felt familiar frustration building as she listened to descriptions of enemy tactics that her banned methods had been specifically designed to counter. For 2 years, she had tried to convince military high command that conventional fighter doctrine was becoming obsolete against adversaries who refused to fight according to established rules. Sir, she interjected from the back of the room, request permission to review enemy tactical patterns. Morrison's expression showed the conflict between desperate circumstances and institutional policy. Captain Mitchell, you're not cleared for combat operations. Sir, I'm cleared for tactical analysis. The patterns you're describing match scenarios I've been studying. Morrison activated detailed radar tracks showing enemy aircraft movements that had systematically eliminated Allied fighters through coordinated attacks that exploited weaknesses in standard formation, flying, and engagement protocols. Zoe studied the tactical displays while her mind processed patterns that confirmed her worst fears about conventional air combat doctrine. Enemy forces were using precisely the tactics she had warned about, coordinated swarming attacks that overwhelmed individual aircraft through numerical superiority and unconventional maneuvering. Sir, enemy forces are employing Wolfpack tactics designed to exploit the predictability of standard NATO engagement procedures. They're using our own doctrine against us by anticipating our responses and positioning accordingly. Captain, your tactical assessment is noted, but we have experienced squadron leaders who... The briefing was interrupted by emergency communications from the combat zone. Allied forces were requesting immediate air support as enemy aircraft continued systematic elimination of resistance. Sir, Major Harrison addressed Morrison while studying incoming reports. We're looking at potential air superiority loss across the entire theater. Enemy forces are operating with effectiveness that exceeds conventional countermeasures. Morrison looked around the briefing room at faces that reflected the same concern. They were facing an enemy whose capabilities exceeded their current tactical responses. Standard fighter doctrine was proving inadequate against adversaries who operated outside established parameters. Captain Mitchell, Morrison said slowly, your banned tactics were developed for exactly this type of scenario, weren't they? Yes, sir. Unconventional threats require unconventional responses. Sir, Major Harrison interjected, with respect, Captain Mitchell's methods have been deemed too dangerous for operational deployment. Major, our conventional methods are currently achieving zero effectiveness against enemy forces who have eliminated 3 entire squadrons. Perhaps it's time to reconsider what constitutes acceptable risk. Morrison activated classified displays showing tactical analysis that had been conducted on Zoe's methods. Her approach to aerial combat involved rapid formation changes, extreme angle attacks, and coordination patterns that created tactical unpredictability. Captain Mitchell, if we were to authorize deployment of your tactics, what would you need? Sir, 4 F-16 configured for maximum maneuverability, pilots willing to trust unconventional coordination, and authorization to engage enemy forces using methods that violate every standard engagement procedure. Elaborate on the violations. Sir, my tactics involve deliberate near-collision maneuvering, formation flying that creates apparent chaos, and engagement angles that require split-second timing with zero margin for error. Morrison studied intelligence reports showing the systematic destruction of Allied aircraft through enemy tactics that conventional doctrine couldn't counter effectively. Captain, your methods were banned because they nearly caused training accidents. Sir, they nearly caused accidents because pilots were trying to implement them while maintaining standard safety protocols. True implementation requires accepting calculated risks that training environments can't replicate. You're asking for authorization to implement tactics that could result in friendly aircraft collisions. Sir, I'm requesting authorization to implement tactics that will prevent enemy aircraft from systematically eliminating our forces. The risk calculation has changed significantly. Morrison looked around the briefing room at pilots whose conventional training was proving inadequate against enemy forces who refused to engage according to established rules. Captain Mitchell, you have authorization to select 3 pilots and implement your tactics against enemy forces currently operating over Sector 7. Mission parameters: achieve air superiority using whatever methods prove effective. Sir, I'll need pilots who can abandon everything they learned in flight school and trust techniques that feel like they're going to kill everyone involved. Captain Rodriguez, Captain Thompson, Lieutenant Chen, you're assigned to Captain Mitchell's flight. Consider this an experimental deployment of unconventional tactics. The 3 pilots exchanged glances that reflected uncertainty about joining a mission led by someone whose methods had been officially banned for 2 years. Sir, Captain Rodriguez addressed Zoe directly, what exactly are these tactics that military high command considers too dangerous? Rodriguez, imagine everything you know about safe fighter operations. Now, imagine doing the exact opposite while maintaining precise coordination with 3 other aircraft attempting the same impossibility. That sounds like a suicide mission. It sounds like suicide to enemy forces who expect us to follow predictable patterns. We're going to be so unpredictable that they can't anticipate our movements long enough to target us effectively. 30 minutes later, Zoe strapped into the cockpit of F-16, C tail number 87-0257, an aircraft she hadn't flown in combat for 2 years. The fighter had been configured for maximum maneuverability with reduced fuel load and specialized weapon selection optimized for close-range engagements. Her wingmen, Rodriguez, Thompson, and Chen, were positioned in a formation that appeared random, but was actually precisely calculated to create tactical unpredictability while maintaining mutual support. Raven Flight, this is Tower Control. You are cleared for immediate departure to Sector 7. Enemy aircraft strength estimated at 20 fighters in coordinated attack formation. Tower, Raven 1 acknowledging. Departing for engagement using experimental tactical protocols. The 4 F-16s lifted off from Ramstein and accelerated toward combat that would either validate Zoe's banned tactics or prove military high command's concerns were justified. During the 18-minute flight to the combat zone, Zoe briefed her wingmen on tactics that violated every principle of conventional fighter operations. Raven Flight, listen carefully, because we're going to do things that feel completely wrong. Standard doctrine teaches formation integrity, predictable spacing, and coordinated movements that enemy forces can anticipate. We're going to fly in patterns that create apparent chaos while maintaining actual coordination. Raven 1, elaborate on apparent chaos, Rodriguez requested. Rodriguez, imagine 4 aircraft that appear to be flying randomly while actually executing coordinated maneuvers designed to create multiple overlapping threat vectors that enemy forces can't predict or counter. That sounds like we're going to collide with each other. Only if you try to maintain safe distances. We're going to fly closer together than any training manual allows, change directions faster than standard procedures permit, and coordinate attacks from angles that conventional tactics consider impossible. Raven 1, how close are we talking about? Thompson, close enough that enemy forces can't target one aircraft without risking collision with others. Close enough that our formation creates tactical confusion about our actual numbers and intentions. As they approached the combat zone, radar screens began painting enemy aircraft that had systematically eliminated Allied fighters through superior coordination and advanced tactics. Raven Flight, multiple contacts bearing 045, range 80 miles, altitude 25,000 feet. Count 20 enemy fighters in coordinated attack formation. Zoe studied the tactical display while her mind shifted into combat mode that had been suppressed for 2 years. Enemy forces were flying in precisely the patterns her banned tactics had been designed to exploit. Raven Flight, begin implementation of Chaos Formation Alpha, close to minimum separation, and prepare for rapid vector changes. The 4 F-16s moved into formation that appeared suicidal to anyone trained in conventional fighter tactics. Aircraft separated by distances measured in feet rather than aircraft lengths, flying in patterns that created visual confusion about their actual coordination. Raven 1, this feels like we're about to collide, Chen transmitted, his voice tight with stress. Chen, maintain formation integrity regardless of how it feels. Enemy forces are about to learn why conventional tactics become liabilities against unconventional threats. At 60 miles range, enemy aircraft began maneuvering into attack positions that demonstrated sophisticated tactical coordination. They were flying in formations designed to overwhelm individual fighters through numerical superiority and concentrated firepower. But Zoe's chaos formation created targeting problems that enemy forces hadn't anticipated. The tight grouping of American aircraft made individual targeting nearly impossible, while the apparent randomness of their movements prevented predictive firing solutions. Raven Flight, begin Chaos Maneuver Sequence 1. Execute rapid vector changes on my mark. The 4 F-16s simultaneously changed direction in patterns that appeared completely random, but were actually coordinated to create maximum tactical confusion. Enemy forces attempting to track individual aircraft found their targeting systems unable to maintain lock due to the unpredictable nature of American movements. Raven 1, enemy forces are breaking formation, Rodriguez reported. They appear confused by our flight patterns. Rodriguez, enemy confusion is exactly what we want. Begin chaos attack formation. Beta. The tactical situation transformed as Zoe's banned tactics created exactly the effects she had predicted. Enemy forces trained to counter conventional fighter doctrine found themselves facing aircraft that operated outside all established parameters. The first enemy aircraft died during a high-speed head-on pass that conventional doctrine would never attempt. Zoe's F-16 approached the enemy formation at an angle that created apparent collision course while actually providing optimal firing position for a split-second engagement window. Her AIM-120 AMRAAM missile eliminated the lead enemy fighter before their formation could adjust to the unconventional attack vector. Raven Flight, 1 enemy down. Continue chaos formation while engaging targets of opportunity. The aerial battle that followed defied every principle of conventional air combat. 4 American aircraft flying in impossible formations engaged 20 enemy fighters using tactics that created systematic confusion among opponents trained to fight predictable adversaries. Rodriguez eliminated his first enemy during a vertical climbing attack that positioned his F-16 directly below the enemy formation, an angle that conventional tactics considered too dangerous due to potential fratricide, but provided perfect firing position against aircraft that expected threats from horizontal approaches. Thompson's kill came during a maneuver that appeared to be a defensive spiral, but was actually an offensive positioning technique that placed him behind an enemy fighter whose pilot was attempting to track other American aircraft in the chaotic formation. Chen scored his first victory using a tactic that involved deliberate near collision with his own wingman to create a firing angle that enemy forces couldn't anticipate or counter. But the real effectiveness of Zoe's banned tactics became apparent as the engagement continued. Enemy forces, trained to fight against conventional formations, found themselves unable to coordinate effective responses against aircraft that operated in patterns that defied prediction. Raven 1, enemy forces are attempting to retreat, Thompson reported as surviving enemy fighters began disengaging from combat. Negative, Raven Flight. We don't let them escape to report our tactical capabilities. Continue engagement until all enemy aircraft are eliminated. The systematic destruction of enemy forces continued as Zoe's tactics proved devastatingly effective against adversaries who couldn't adapt to unconventional warfare. Her banned methods created tactical advantages that exceeded every prediction military high command had made during their analysis. The final enemy aircraft died during a coordinated attack that involved all 4 American fighters simultaneously engaging from different vectors using timing that required split-second precision. The enemy pilot found himself facing threats from angles that conventional fighter doctrine insisted were impossible to coordinate. Raven Flight. All enemy aircraft eliminated. Combat zone is clear. 20 enemy fighters had entered the engagement with superior numbers, advanced aircraft, and tactical coordination that had systematically eliminated 3 Allied squadrons. 20 enemy fighters lay scattered across Eastern European countryside, destroyed by 4 American pilots using tactics that military high command had banned as too dangerous for operational use. The return flight to Ramstein was conducted in silence as pilots processed what they had accomplished using methods that violated every principle of safe fighter operations. Raven 1, Rodriguez finally transmitted, "Those tactics were the most effective air combat methods I've ever experienced. Why exactly were they banned?" Rodriguez, "Because they require accepting risks that peacetime training can't evaluate. Military high command was concerned about training accidents, not combat effectiveness. But the effectiveness was proven today. Today we faced an enemy that forced us to choose between conventional safety and mission success. The risk calculation changed completely. The debriefing at Ramstein lasted 4 hours and involved senior officers from multiple commands who struggled to understand how 4 American fighters had achieved complete victory against enemy forces that had systematically eliminated larger formations using conventional tactics. Captain Mitchell, Colonel Morrison studied combat footage that showed aerial maneuvers he had never seen in 15 years of fighter operations. Your tactics achieved results that exceed every performance prediction for F-16 capabilities. Sir, conventional performance predictions assume conventional employment. Unconventional tactics unlock capabilities that standard doctrine doesn't access. Your formation flying violated minimum separation standards by factors that suggest suicidal decision-making. Sir, minimum separation standards are designed for training safety, not combat effectiveness. Enemy forces can't target what they can't predict, and they can't predict aircraft that operate outside established parameters. General Hayes, Theater Air Commander, activated classified displays showing tactical analysis of the engagement. Captain, your methods achieved air superiority against numerically superior forces using 4 aircraft. Conventional doctrine would have required at least 12 fighters to achieve similar results. Sir, Conventional doctrine would have resulted in the systematic elimination of all 12 fighters, just like the previous 3 squadrons. Explain the effectiveness differential. Sir, enemy forces were trained to counter conventional NATO tactics. They had studied our doctrine, anticipated our responses, and developed countermeasures for standard engagement procedures. My tactics created situations they had never encountered and couldn't adapt to quickly enough. The analysis continued as senior officers struggled to reconcile the dramatic combat success with institutional concerns about training safety and operational risk. Captain Mitchell, General Hayes said slowly, your tactics will be immediately implemented throughout fighter commands. But we need to develop training protocols that allow pilots to learn these methods without creating unacceptable accident rates. Sir, that's the fundamental challenge. These tactics can't be safely practiced in training environments because they require accepting risks that peacetime operations prohibit. Then how do we train pilots to implement them? Sir, we train them in conventional methods until they achieve expertise. Then we train them to abandon everything they learned when combat situations require unconventional responses. 6 months later, Captain Zoe Mitchell was promoted to Major and assigned as Director of Advanced Fighter Tactics, responsible for developing training programs that bridge the gap between conventional safety and unconventional effectiveness. Her chaos doctrine became required study for fighter pilots throughout NATO forces, though implementation remained restricted to combat situations where conventional methods had proven inadequate. The program attracted international attention from Allied air forces seeking to understand how American tactics had achieved such devastating effectiveness against superior enemy forces. The Mitchell method, as it became known in international fighter pilot communities, emphasized that tactical superiority came from operating outside enemy expectations rather than matching enemy capabilities. But the most important lesson wasn't tactical. It was institutional. Zoe had proven that sometimes the most dangerous enemy of military effectiveness was military doctrine itself, especially when doctrine became more important than adapting to new threats. Excellence doesn't come from following rules, she told each new class of advanced fighter pilots. Excellence comes from understanding why rules exist and knowing when circumstances require breaking them to accomplish missions that conventional methods can't achieve. 2 years after her legendary engagement, Major Zoe Mitchell received the Air Force Cross for her contributions to tactical aviation. But her greatest satisfaction came from reports that described successful air operations conducted by pilots who had learned to think beyond conventional limitations. The 20 enemy fighters she had eliminated had taught the entire Air Force that innovation often came from sources that institutional thinking considered too dangerous to pursue. Her banned tactics had become standard doctrine, proving that sometimes the most effective approach was the one that everyone agreed would never work. The global implications of Zoe's tactical revolution extended far beyond individual air engagements to fundamental changes in how military aviation approached combat doctrine and training methodology. Fighter pilot schools throughout NATO alliance began implementing modified versions of her chaos doctrine, though with extensive safety protocols that attempted to balance training effectiveness with acceptable risk levels. Major Mitchell, Air Force Chief of Staff General Patricia Reynolds, addressed her during a classified strategic planning session. Your tactical innovations have created ripple effects throughout international military aviation. Allied air forces are requesting access to your training methodologies. Zoe studied global deployment statistics that showed dramatic improvements in air combat effectiveness wherever her methods had been implemented. Ma'am, the challenge is maintaining tactical unpredictability while systematically teaching the underlying principles. Once enemy forces understand our chaos patterns, they become predictable again. Elaborate on the predictability concern. Ma'am, the effectiveness of chaos tactics depends on enemy forces being unable to anticipate our movements. If we standardize chaos into doctrine, we risk creating new patterns that sophisticated enemies can learn to counter. General Reynolds activated classified intelligence reports showing how enemy air forces had begun developing countermeasures specifically designed to exploit conventional NATO tactics. Major, your concern is precisely why we need pilots who can improvise beyond any standardized approach. The strategic challenge proved more complex than originally anticipated. Zoe's tactics worked because they violated expectations, but institutionalizing violation of expectations created new expectations that could be exploited by adaptive enemies. Ma'am, we need to develop pilots who can think beyond any doctrine, including chaos doctrine. True tactical superiority comes from infinite adaptability rather than superior techniques. Major, describe infinite adaptability in practical terms. Ma'am, pilots who can abandon any method the moment it becomes predictable. Pilots who can innovate new chaos faster than enemies can adapt to previous chaos. General Reynolds reviewed combat statistics that demonstrated how Zoe's approach had transformed air warfare effectiveness across multiple theaters. Major, you're describing a fundamental shift from teaching techniques to teaching thinking. Yes, ma'am. Techniques can be countered. Thinking adapts faster than countermeasures can be developed. The conversation represented a philosophical transformation in military aviation that extended beyond tactical innovation to cognitive revolution. Zoe had proven that superior pilots weren't those who executed techniques perfectly, but those who could abandon perfection to achieve objectives that perfect execution couldn't accomplish. 6 months later, Major Zoe Mitchell received orders to establish the Advanced Cognitive Fighter Training Center at Nellis Air Force Base, a facility dedicated to developing pilots whose thinking transcended any specific tactical approach. The center's mission was unprecedented: create pilots who could outthink any enemy by refusing to be constrained by any doctrine, including doctrines they had created themselves. Major Mitchell, Brigadier General Martinez, commander of Advanced Training Operations, addressed her during the center's activation ceremony. You're pioneering an approach to pilot development that treats tactics as temporary solutions rather than permanent doctrine. The training center attracted students from allied air forces seeking to understand how American pilots had achieved such devastating effectiveness against numerically superior enemies. But the curriculum Zoe developed proved more challenging than anticipated. Students, she addressed her first advanced class, everything you learned in flight school was designed to make you predictable enough to coordinate with friendly forces. Everything I'm going to teach you is designed to make you unpredictable enough to survive against adaptive enemies. Ma'am, one student asked, how do we coordinate with friendly forces if we're being unpredictable? Lieutenant, you coordinate through shared understanding of chaos rather than shared execution of patterns. Your wingman needs to understand your thinking process, not your flight path. The training program emphasized principles that challenged fundamental assumptions about military aviation, that safety protocols could become tactical liabilities, that coordination required communication rather than conformity, and that survival often demanded abandoning everything that training had emphasized. Results exceeded all expectations while simultaneously creating new challenges. Graduates of Zoe's program achieved remarkable combat effectiveness, but struggled to integrate with conventional units whose pilots operated according to traditional doctrine. Major, General Reynolds reviewed operational reports during a program evaluation. Your graduates are achieving outstanding individual results, but creating coordination problems with standard fighter squadrons. Ma'am, that's the inevitable result of teaching adaptive thinking to individuals who must operate within systems designed for standardized thinking. Recommendation? Ma'am, we need to transition entire units rather than individual pilots. Chaos tactics require group coordination that conventional pilots can't provide. The solution involved establishing entire squadrons trained in cognitive flexibility rather than technical precision. These units operated with effectiveness that exceeded conventional formations while maintaining internal coordination through shared understanding rather than shared procedures. The Mitchell squadrons, as they became known throughout fighter pilot communities, demonstrated combat effectiveness that forced enemy air forces to completely reconsider their tactical approaches. Traditional fighter doctrine became ineffective against opponents who refused to operate according to any predictable pattern. But Zoe's greatest achievement wasn't tactical. It was cultural. She had proven that military excellence came from thinking beyond limitations rather than perfecting techniques within limitations. Some pilots fly aircraft, she told a joint session of the International Military Aviation Leaders. Others fly possibilities. The best understand that aircraft capabilities are limited only by pilot imagination and willingness to exceed conventional boundaries. 2 years after establishing the training center, Lieutenant Colonel Zoe Mitchell, her promotion recognizing contributions that had transformed international fighter aviation, received the Distinguished Flying Cross for achievements that extended beyond individual heroism to systematic innovation. Her methods were studied at military academies worldwide, not for their tactical specifics, but for their demonstration that breakthrough performance required abandoning the safety of established doctrine in favor of the uncertainty of continuous adaptation. The 20 enemy fighters she had eliminated using banned tactics had catalyzed changes that protected thousands of Allied aircrew through enhanced effectiveness rather than enhanced protection. Her legacy wasn't the aircraft she had destroyed, but the thinking she had liberated. The program she established continued producing pilots whose adaptive capabilities exceeded any specific tactical training, ensuring that future air warfare would be dominated by thinking rather than technique, innovation rather than doctrine. Lieutenant Colonel Zoe Mitchell had proven that the most dangerous weapon in aerial combat wasn't advanced aircraft or sophisticated missiles. It was pilots who refused to accept that anything was impossible when mission success demanded the unprecedented. Her banned tactics had become more than military doctrine. They had become proof that excellence emerges when conventional wisdom meets unconventional determination, and unconventional determination always wins. The long-term strategic impact of Zoe's innovations became apparent 3 years later when enemy air forces worldwide began abandoning traditional fighter development programs in favor of adapting to American tactical unpredictability. Intelligence reports indicated that hostile nations were struggling to develop countermeasures against pilots who refused to operate according to any consistent pattern. Colonel Mitchell, Defense Secretary Patricia Hayes addressed her during a Pentagon briefing on global air superiority. "Your tactical revolution has created strategic advantages that extend beyond individual engagements to comprehensive deterrent effects." The briefing included classified analysis showing how enemy military planners had been forced to allocate enormous resources to developing responses to American pilots whose tactics couldn't be predicted or systematically countered. "Ma'am, the strategic multiplication effect demonstrates that individual innovation can influence entire theaters of operation when it forces enemies to completely reconsider their fundamental assumptions. Colonel, your approach has essentially weaponized unpredictability itself." "Yes, ma'am. We've transformed tactical uncertainty from a problem to be solved into a weapon to be deployed." The conversation represented the culmination of a journey that had begun with banned tactics and evolved into strategic doctrine that influenced global military aviation. Zoe's methods had proven that innovation often emerged from sources that conventional thinking considered too dangerous to pursue. 5 years after her legendary 20-kill engagement, Colonel Zoe Mitchell received assignment as Director of Strategic Aviation Innovation at the Pentagon, a position created to ensure that American air superiority remained unchallenged through continuous tactical evolution rather than technological advancement alone. Her final achievement was establishing doctrine that institutionalized anti-institutionalism, systematic procedures for abandoning systematic procedures when circumstances demanded unprecedented responses. The 20 enemy fighters that had challenged her, banned tactics, had unknowingly catalyzed a revolution that redefined how military forces approach the relationship between safety and effectiveness, doctrine and innovation, conventional wisdom and unconventional success. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, you can subscribe to see more incredible stories like this one.